Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all settled in, had a wonderful first day at CPhI, and welcome to today's Insights Briefing, the keynote speech. My name is Brandon Boyd. I am with Clarivate Analytics, and I lead their global generics practice. And I'm excited to be talking to you today about some of the latest trends in the generic marketplace and how the leading companies and a wider range of generic manufacturers and API manufacturers are adapting to the changes in this marketplace and the strategies that they're using to grow their businesses. Go right into it. So the generics market today is experiencing new challenges, challenges to growth, and I would say even sustaining the same level of value that the industry has had. And these changes, these challenges, are the result of numerous trends, and some of them I've captured here, and I'm sure they're familiar to you in the industry. But first and foremost, the highly competitive environment that we see today, most associated with downward price erosion, significant price erosion in many of the developed markets today, and I'm sure you're feeling that in your businesses. We also see a changing mix of new product opportunities. So here I'm talking about the novel drugs coming out of clinic with a significant emphasis on low volume, higher priced specialty products, changing the dynamics and the capabilities needed for a generic and API manufacturer going into the future. And associated with this, we see the increasing sophistication of the defensive strategies used by the brands in their life cycle management, defending their brands much better and with new capabilities than we've seen, particularly in North American markets. And then the final point, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, is the increasing scrutiny of compliance and quality by the regulators around the world. I need only mention the word valsartan today to really highlight what that means to the marketplace. So against this backdrop, how are we growing as an industry? How do we sustain that growth trajectory? And I would say, as I look at the marketplace, look at our data, what I'm seeing is more and more the critical question, or how to answer that critical question of growth by a portfolio manager is to differentiate from competitors. Of course, differentiation in a generics industry can be quite difficult, where the products of one company are or are expected to be the exact same as that next company. So what then do we do? What is the answer? Well, there's two basic strategies that I'll speak about today. The first is to optimize for scale. And I say optimize because the trend recently has been for the largest companies in the marketplace to get smaller, to reach a size that's smaller to maximize their financial performance or to minimize their costs. And then meanwhile, we can look at diversification. And here, when I say diversification, I'm talking about adding in new capabilities, new technologies that unlock new opportunities, new products, and new markets. And we'll talk more specifically about that in a moment. So I said that these are basic strategies, and yes, they apply. Optimization of scale, diversification apply to really any company in any industry. So what then is new for the generic industry and the API industry that we all operate in? And I would say that what's changing is a shift in the behavior of the companies, of the finished dose and the API manufacturers. I would say the first change that I'm seeing is what I'll call the need for speed. More and more than ever, companies are being challenged to develop and launch products into market faster than they ever have before as a means to sustain their growth. And managers, those business managers, are being tasked with taking action and adapting to the marketplace to stay ahead of competitors faster than they ever have before. Because of this, because of the need for speed, the next change, or the next trend that I'm seeing is a higher tolerance for risk, accepting higher complexity and higher risk environments into the portfolio strategy as a means to drive forward growth. And really, what we're going to talk about in more detail is how this is making companies extend beyond their traditional areas of focus and expertise and add in products, technologies, capabilities well beyond their traditional area of focus. And this, increasing complexity and thus increasing risk, companies are more recently, or more aggressively, I should say, turning to partnerships and M&A, to acquisitions in order to mitigate that risk or to gain flexibility in their operations so that they can carry forward and get to market as quickly as possible with those new types of products. So let's drill into diversification as that competitive differentiator. So I'll talk about 3 specific pathways to differentiate the portfolio that are being used successfully today and with more frequency today across a wider range of generic and API companies. I'll speak more about the finished dose, but obviously the API manufacturers need to keep right in sync with their upstream partners. So the first strategy I'll speak about is serving new channels, launching your products to meet the needs of new customers in new markets. So this might mean, for example, extending beyond the retail pharmacy, entering into the hospital, into the clinic space, or even serving the government institutions as well. Now, the example here is serving institutional injectable needs, let's say, extending beyond the oral solid dosage forms. The second option available is to enhance your launch strategy, so the go-to-market strategy. So the first option, particularly for those of you active in North America, is the patent challenge, the paragraph 4 patent challenge in the US. So being one of those first filers in order to capture market exclusivity. Related to that could be the fast follower approach, waiting for that exclusivity period to expire, but then entering as those patents have been knocked out and gaining additional time to market, speed to market. And then finally, we'll speak about moving up the product value chain from the traditional immediate release, lower complexity products into those higher barrier to entry and thus presumably higher value, more sustainable value products. So let's look at all 3 of these in a little bit more detail today. There we go. So superficially, serving these new channels, new customers, should be relatively easy. It looks relatively easy. But as you dig into it, you realize that there's additional complexity here. So serving a new channel such as the hospital space could mean adding in new products such as sterile injectables that extend you beyond the traditional area of focus of your organization, of your capabilities, of your experience. It could also mean new product configurations or new packaging configurations. Blisters are well known and pervasive in Europe, not so much in North America. So we're looking at something different that you need to bring into your organization and into your supply chain in order to be successful in these markets. And then finally, you may also need to comply with new regulations, new mandates. As an example, local manufacturing mandates if you're serving a government institution or a government purchasing program. All of these things together add risk. They add risk of delays, risk of compliance issues in these new environments, as well as simply exposing the organization to situations where they have no experience from prior years. There we go. So this chart is showing FDA approvals of generic as well as branded products over the years. And obviously the trend has been for a surge of new generic finished dosage forms coming to market. And this really underscores companies looking for additional value by launching new types of products into those different channels, into the hospital and institutional space, as well as serving government customers as well. It's also highlighting, of course, the increasing competitive environment within regulated markets, and here displayed US. So the second strategy I talked about involved patent challenging the patents. So here we have a clear trade-off in risk and reward down to the level of how do you develop your product, how do you match that against your legal and go-to-market strategy. And the most aggressive strategy, and also the one offering the most reward then, would be to be the first among those first challengers. It comes with a greater need in balancing your formulation against the patent landscape, as well as the just high level of unknowns and risk of delays, risk of getting approval with your bioequivalent formulation. But it offers that benefit of market exclusivity. One step away from that in terms of level of risk then, and also reward, would be then to file your patent challenge, but then wait for that other company, for another patent challenger to kind of sort of lead the way and open that marketplace, knock out some of those patents for you. You're then ready to enter the market with them if you've challenged the same patents. In a similar fashion, you may not challenge the patents yourself, but you're waiting and planning for somebody else to remove those IP barriers to market for you before the natural expiration of them. So it involves risk of stocking up your inventories in preparation for that market opening event, offering some additional value potentially versus the least valuable but least risky situation where you simply wait for all patents to naturally expire, let's say. So what this chart is showing is the average time between the approval of the original brand, the reference listed product, and that first notice to FDA of a paragraph 4 patent challenge. And you'll notice that we've migrated the trend down to 4 years. So essentially, we're looking at the natural limit of that NCE -1, so the new chemical exclusivity, 1 year prior to that 5 years of when the generic can first file with FDA. This is also saying that many, if not most, of the non-NCE candidates are being challenged, their patents are being challenged much later from when they come to market. This is also saying then that there's fewer and fewer of those non-NC opportunities available, and with that, the truly sole exclusivity opportunity and the value that could be derived from that. So again, highlighting the very competitive nature of particularly the US marketplace and what's necessary in order to sustain value creation in regulated markets, even with a riskier strategy like patent challenges. And we can also look at the paragraph 4 filings cumulatively by country. You'll notice the large surge in India and coming across to some other of the more newcomers to this particular strategy. And as we look at this, we can also deduce from this the fact of a very rapid change in product strategy or portfolio strategy from a lot of those Indian companies who are traditionally API focused, small molecule, immediate release oral solid focused, now changing in their strategies in order to capture more value from those larger regulated markets, accepting more risk into their portfolios and in the type of products that they're bringing to market to capture that value. I would also say, something to think about and to keep in your mind is the number for China. Don't expect it to stay so low. I've visited China recently. The companies there are very actively, very aggressively interested in regulated markets like the US, so don't expect it to stay at 32 for very long. And then, finally, we can talk about moving up that product value chain, introducing products that have increasing complexity for one reason or more, creating barriers to entry. Now, this is just an illustrative example. It's not all-encompassing. But it represents the movement from the less complex types of formulations and products into the most complex. And this is the general model that we see being used successfully by a lot of those companies who are looking to unlock value and sustain the growth of their businesses over the long term. And of course, it's not entirely representative of the complexity of any single category. For example, we can look at APIs. There are many, many examples of high potency, more complex APIs that at any given point in time have only one or a few suppliers in the marketplace. So we can look at any one of these categories, and these, not all the categories available, of course, of types of products, but it represents the overall model of the evolution of a generic manufacturer through their time, moving from the immediate solids or oral solid immediate release into something like the semi-solids and liquids, and then finally into devices, drug device combinations, some of the larger molecular chains like peptides. We can look at some of the examples in complex products, and I've chosen examples from Indian manufacturers, again, to represent that movement from a company with a heritage, with a legacy in APIs and immediate release oral solids. How do they grow? They're growing by these investments into these more complex products. So companies like Sun, Dr. Reddy's, putting their stakes in the ground for liposomal technologies, looking at and developing transdermal delivery systems, and then other companies focusing on respiratory devices, a range of respiratory devices. And again, these are just a few of the many examples out there, both in terms of types of products, but as well as the companies involved. You know, these tend to be some of the larger companies based in India. However, it's not just them. A large number of companies in India and elsewhere are placing bets, making investments into these very, very complex combination products or delivery technologies. Nor are generic companies limiting themselves to merely copying branded products. They're engaging in what we call incremental innovation by leveraging their capabilities and their experience in formulating and manufacturing. So we see traditional generic manufacturers coming to market, developing new dosage forms of products, and really new chemical combinations as well to serve the unique needs of their particular marketplaces in ways that other companies, the novel brand companies, are not doing today. So offering additional speed to market as well as some additional value over a pure, let's call it substitutable generic. And that's, you know, it's a small molecule space, but we also see this innovation or incremental innovation happening in the larger molecule space. We see companies, you know, traditional oral solid companies moving into biosimilars, as well as peptide and protein-derived formulations. And these are formulations that will not be strictly substitutable for the original reference branded products. They will carry trade names. They may even be supported by a sales force. So we see the, you know, increasing blurry line between traditional generic pharma and brand pharma. And that's really underscoring for us the complexity and the risk involved in growing and maintaining growth in what we consider kind of the traditional generic environment, the generic marketplace. So I said earlier that, you know, the drive for speed, operational flexibility, and mitigation of risk is driving companies to look for partnerships and look for acquisitions. And we can see some great examples of this happening, and picked out just a few for us to speak about today. So in the partnership space, partnership for more complex products, we see companies like Hikma and Vectura on generic Advair, Avestra and Glenmark for generic NuvaRing, Sandoz and Momenta for generic Copaxone. And then also, you know, pursuing acquisitions in order to capture those differentiated capabilities and stay ahead of competitors and lock up that technology to move very quickly and to have that flexibility and that experience where otherwise you would not. So examples here, I've chosen Fosun and Gland for the sterile injectables, Mylan and Famicare for the oral contraceptive portfolio, and then Alvogen and County Line Pharmaceuticals for the topical formulations. Now, I chose these examples for more than one reason. One, they were good examples of these complex partnerships and acquisitions, but they also highlight the delicate balance between risk and reward. Well, why? Let's talk about the kind of the risk first. So, as a great example, let's take generic Advair. So, the relevant patents have expired, yet we have not seen any company get FDA approval. So Hikma, as well as Sandoz and Mylan, have all been rejected, and I think multiple times now, by US FDA for their generic version of Advair, even though they've been working on it for quite some time. So again, that's an example of where, even though you may have the best technology, the best experience, the best partners, it doesn't guarantee success in these increasingly complex products. I'll change over and talk about success in this area as well. And again, I chose the example of generic Copaxone or glatiramer or acetate. So we now do have multiple companies in market around the world with their generic alternatives for Copaxone. However, this even underscores the risk and the complexity involved, because for each one of those manufacturers, for each of their products in those individual marketplaces, there was a high level of uncertainty both around the regulatory approval and the litigation outcome for their products. So even where their success eventually was found, the uncertainty and the risks involved were quite high to bring those products to market, particularly in the US. So again, it's all about a delicate balance between the risk and the reward in order to sustain growth in this highly competitive generic marketplace. So let me summarize what we've discussed today. So we see a generic market that is and will remain highly competitive. We see these challenges to sustainable growth really leading companies to try to differentiate themselves. And again, it's very, very difficult to differentiate yourself when your products are expected to be the same in a generic marketplace. Nevertheless, that need to differentiate is driving many companies to diversify their strategies, to diversify their portfolios, to diversify their capabilities, and in part, that's driving them to act with a new urgency in terms of speed. To mitigate obviously, what we see is complexity and risk that they're forced to tolerate. They're turning to partnerships, they're turning to acquisitions in order to capture those experiences, those capabilities, those technologies. And as I conclude, I'll turn your mind back to the slide I just showed, those examples of complex partnerships, of complex products, and the success, but also the challenges and continuing challenges that those companies are going through. So, I think what drives the point home and what I want to leave you with is, success in increasingly complex products and in these marketplaces is going to require patience, exceptional patience, but also exceptional focus on quality and execution, both with your partners and with your internal capabilities and internal teams. So with that, thank you very much for your time and attention today. This particular presentation is derived from a white paper that Clarivate recently published. We do have a few copies available. I have my colleague in the back that if you want to speak with her, you can get that copy today. Thank you.